Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into the incredibly gritty, highly dramatic, and honestly largely forgotten origin story of two inseparable brothers who built an absolute automotive empire. I mean, when you hear the name Dodge, your mind probably jumps straight to great American muscle cars, right? You think horsepower, burning rubber, the whole shebang. But the real story behind that famous badge isn't just about fast cars. It's this wild tale of absolute mechanical genius, fierce loyalty, and a massive all-or-nothing gamble that completely changed the industry forever.
And right out of the gate, this story flips basically everything we know about American automotive history right on its head. Did you know that long before they ever put their own name on a radiator, the founders of Dodge were actually the literal foundation of another monumental brand? We're going to explore exactly how two small-town mechanics became the indispensable backbone of Henry Ford's rise to power, and why they eventually decided to just walk away from it all to forge their own destiny.
Section 1. The Inseparable Dodge Brothers. Okay, so to really get the Dodge brand, we have to start with the men themselves. You simply cannot understand this company without understanding the unbreakable bond between John and Horace. Born in the 1860s over in Niles, Michigan, these guys came from a humble but super industrious family, and they were bold, very competitive, and wildly talented. You had John, right? He was the aggressive one, a highly skilled machinist who even patented a dirt-proof ball bearing for bicycles back in 1896. And then you had Horace. Horace was the quieter, detail-oriented finance guy. He handled the contracts to make sure they were never taken advantage of by slimy businessmen. Together, they were just this absolute powerhouse of complementary skills.
And this brilliant quote really just hits the nail on the head regarding their fierce loyalty to each other. There's this famous story from their early days where a factory superintendent wanted to hire just one of them. Well, John flat out refused the job, delivering this exact line. They drank together, they worked together, and ultimately they were going to conquer Detroit together. For them, it was always a package deal or nothing at all. That dynamic literally defined their entire business philosophy.
So starting out building Evans and Dodge bicycles, they quickly leveled up to precision auto parts. By 1900, they had opened up a small machine shop in Detroit with just 12 employees. But their craftsmanship was so exceptional, it caught the attention of Ransom Olds. They started supplying engines and transmissions for the first mass-produced, low-cost car in the U.S., the curved-dash Oldsmobile. And establishing that kind of stellar reputation for precision and reliability, well, that's exactly what caught the eye of a certain legendary inventor who was desperately looking for help.
Section 2. The Men Who Built Ford.
This brings us to a massive paradigm shift. It's 1903, and Henry Ford is launching his new motor company. But Ford has a major problem. He doesn't have the capital, or the facilities really, to build his own cars from scratch. So what does he do? He turns to the best mechanics in Detroit. He hires the Dodge brothers to manufacture an initial order of 650 chassis, engines, gearboxes, and axles. Henry Ford had to rely entirely on the Dodge's massive Hamtramck plant and their mechanical genius just to get his company off the ground. Basically, John and Horace were the literal engine behind Ford's early success. Get this. At their peak, they were manufacturing practically 80% of the entire Model T. The only things they weren't supplying were the seats and the tires. So if you were to watch an early Ford roll down the road back then, you were essentially looking at a machine built by the Dodge brothers. But here is where the story gets really, really fascinating. Because Ford couldn't pay them entirely in cash right at the start, he gave them a $10,000 stake in his new company. That single transaction completely transformed their lives. It made John and Horace Dodge not just Ford's primary suppliers, but major shareholders in what was about to become the most successful car company in the entire world. Section 3. Breaking away from Ford. Now, as you can imagine, as both men grew insanely wealthy alongside Ford, the tension behind the scenes started to boil over. I mean, you can only keep two incredibly ambitious, brilliant mechanics in the shadows for so long, right? By 1913, the differences were really piling up. They were clashing with Henry Ford over how employees were treated. The Dodge brothers were constantly pushing Ford to upgrade the Model T, but Ford stubbornly refused to fix its glaring weaknesses just because it was already highly profitable. John and Horace felt completely creatively stifled. But maybe more importantly, they realized their massive company, which now had 7,000 employees, was entirely precariously dependent on one single customer. So they decided they had to build an uncompromising machine entirely their own way. So they took a massive gamble on their own reputation. In 1913, they formally severed that supplier agreement, announcing their independence. And by July 1914, they raised $5 million through a public stock offering to build a completely new car. They were officially done being the sidekicks. They were stepping into the ring as a primary contender. And hey, remember that initial $10,000 stock investment they made in Ford back in 1903? Well, thanks to that genius move, when Henry Ford finally bought out their shares in 1919, the Dodge brothers walked away with a staggering $32.1 million in total earnings, profits, and dividends. Talk about ROI. It was an astronomical fortune, and it gave them absolute freedom to innovate without Henry Ford or anyone else looking over their shoulder. Section 4, Birth of the Dodge. Okay, so here is the defining moment, the creation of the ultimate anti-Model T. On November 14, 1914, their vision became reality. The very first Dodge Brothers Model 3035, affectionately known as Old Betsy, rolled right off the line. Just picture this. John and Horace sitting proudly in the backseat of their new all-black touring car, featuring real grain leather and wooden spoke wheels. After all those years, they were finally riding in a vehicle with their own name stamped right there on the radiator. It was a massive triumph of both engineering and independence.
When you put the specs side by side, it is so easy to see exactly why the Dodge cost $790, which was almost twice as much as the $440 Ford. It was vastly more powerful. We're talking 35 horsepower compared to Ford's 20. It was larger, boasting a 114-inch wheelbase, which is a full foot longer than the Model T. And it utilized a modern 3-speed sliding gear transmission rather than Ford's clunky old planetary gearbox. The Dodge was engineered purely for quality and performance, completely rejecting the extreme cost-cutting compromises that Henry Ford always demanded. And beyond just being bigger and faster, Old Betsy was packed with groundbreaking innovations. It featured the first mass-produced all-steel body, making it incredibly safe and durable. It boasted a 12-volt electrical system with a real electric starter, meaning no more breaking your arm trying to crank the engine by hand out in the cold. It included an advanced water pump for cooling, and get this, it even came with a speedometer and a windshield included as standard equipment. They practically bulletproofed this car, and they established a legendary reputation for reliability that the buying public absolutely devoured.
And that rugged engineering? It definitely wasn't just some clever marketing gimmick. It was quite literally battle-tested. In 1916, the United States Army purchased 150 Dodge cars. Their durability was so deeply respected that General George S. Patton actually used them to chase down the revolutionary Pancho Villa down in Mexico. It was the first mechanical cavalry charge in U.S. military history. No big deal, right? That completely solidified the Dodge as a tough, dependable machine that could survive some of the harshest conditions on Earth.
Section 5, Rapid Success and Tragic End.
The brothers had essentially built a masterpiece, and the rest of the world noticed immediately. Despite having that higher price tag compared to the Model T, sales just skyrocketed. In 1915, their first full year of production, they sold an astounding 45,000 units. By 1917, that jumped to 124,000. And by 1920, they were pushing out 145,000 cars a year. Within just a few short years, this brand new company rocketed up to become the third largest automaker in the entire United States. But as amazing as the story is, this breathtaking ascent was met with a really sudden, devastating halt. Right at the absolute zenith of their empire, tragedy struck. While attending the New York Auto Show in 1920, John contracted the flu during a global pandemic, and he tragically died of pneumonia in January. He was just 55 years old. Horace, who had sat loyally by his brother's bedside, just never recovered from the grief. Plagued by illness and a genuinely broken heart, Horace followed John to the grave just 11 months later in December. They were completely inseparable in life and, tragically, inseparable in death. With both brothers gone, their widows took control of the empire. In 1925, they sold the company to an investment bank for $146 million. To put that in perspective, that was the largest cash transaction in history at the time. Just 3 years later, in 1928, Walter P. Chrysler purchased the brand for $170 million. But the really amazing thing is that the foundation of quality, grit, and incredible engineering that John and Horace built was so strong, the Dodge brand survived their early deaths. It seamlessly transitioned into the Chrysler family, where it eventually evolved into the legendary muscle car icon that we know and revere today. So, we arrive at our final thought. The Dodge brothers could have very comfortably spent their entire lives in the shadows, quietly and highly profitably building Henry Ford's empire. But instead, they demanded more. They bet it all on their own skill, their own name, and their unbreakable bond as brothers. It really makes you wonder, are you building someone else's dream, or are you laying the foundation for your own? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope the gritty genius of John and Horace Dodge inspires you to take the wheel of your own destiny. See you next time.